Okay, today we're doing Siman Tzadi Ches, Halacha Ches. We'll talk about Milsah, Bitul, lטעמא. And let's first start as follows. Typically, when you have Isser and Heter mixed together, the decision about whether the overall mixture is Mut or Asr, that decision is based on whichever there's more of, what we call Bitul B'Roi. If there's more Isser or Heter, that's what we follow, and that's what makes the food, the mixture, Mut or Asr. As far as food doesn't work like that. And food, the din is, depends whether you could taste it or not. Tam ki'ikar. If you taste the isser, then the mixture is asr, and if you don't taste the isser, then the mixture is mutter. Okay, now, there's a halachos rishonim, whether that's deraisa drabanan. If you hold that tam ki'ikar is only drabanan, then the rules for food are just exactly the same as they are for everything else that we follow roiv. And just a drabanan that you have to worry about, because since you tasted the food is asr, even though it would have been batal roiv. But most hold that the halacha is that we say tam ki'ikar is deraisa. It's essentially that's brought in earlier in Tzadi Ches Beis. And the Mechaber spoke about a case where you can't figure out whether there was shishim or not, and then depending on the situation, if it turns out in the right situation, we have to be machmir because of safek deraisa l'chumra, because you hold the tam ki'ikar is deraisa. Okay, that's why we say tam ki'ikar deraisa. Now, there are times that we actually make decisions based on whether someone could taste food or not. We're at the beginning of Siman Tzadi Ches, it spoke about having people tasting food to decide if it's asr or not. But when those don't apply, which is in most cases that doesn't apply, we follow the rule, you follow shishim. If there's 60 times as much heter as isser, then the isser is batal, and if not, then it's not batal. Where does that come from? It comes from the Gemara. The Gemara says that the foods with the strongest taste are butts of kafle, onions and leek. They have the strongest taste, and even they wouldn't be. You couldn't notice them if they were batal b'shishim, if there was 60 times as much heter as they were, and therefore we see from there that every food could be batal b'shishim. In 60 times you won't taste it. So if you want to know, is the thing batal or is it not batal? You see if there's shishim, and if there's shishim, then you know that it's batal. Okay, that's the regular rules of tam ki'ikar. In this halacha, in halacha ches, the Ramah talks about a different case, about a milsah lטעמא, which means is that this food is such a strong taste to it that you could taste it even in tiny proportions. Which is to say the Gemara says that butts of kafle are the strongest foods and they're batal b'shishim. That's only for regular foods, but there are some foods like salt and spices, the Ramah says, which they have such a strong amount of tam, they're way stronger than butts of a kafle, and therefore they're not batal even if it's 1,000 times. Okay, now just for we're going to talk about 1,000 in a second, but seemingly the reason why the Ramah picks the number 1,000 is because there is such a shita in Beria. We spoke about it when we spoke in Hilchos Tolaim. There's a shita within in the halachos of a beria that a beria can be batal in 960 times, even though it doesn't need. It's not batal b'shishim or batal b'roiv, but a beria could be batal. There's such a sheet that it can be batal in 960 times. So that's my feeling that the thing about it's batal, it's not batal even in 1,000. Means to say is the 960 is not enough. Even 1,000 times, even more than 960 is not enough for a bit. Okay, so now the truth is that even in Avidah lטעמא, the only reason why it's not batal is because it's you can taste it. What happens if it comes to the point? The Shach says, what happens if it comes to the point that even Avidah lטעמא you can't taste it? I mean, the Ramah says even if it's in 1,000 times, it won't be batal. Fine. What happens if it's in a zillion times in an amount that you won't taste it? So then also even Avidah lטעמא could be batal. It's not that a milsah Avidah lטעמא can't be batal. You don't assume that it's batal b'shishim because you could taste it. What happens if you can't taste it anymore either? Then that's going to be batal also. Now, I told you a minute ago that there's a halachos whether tam ki'ikar is deraisa drabanan. We say tam ki'ikar is deraisa, but now this idea that the milsah Avidah lטעמא cannot be batal until even we say even in 1,000 times, that's also a halachos whether that's a deraisa drabanan. I mean, even if you say tam ki'ikar is deraisa, maybe this that milsah Avidah lטעמא can be batal. Maybe that's only drabanan. And the Shach and many others paskin like those who say that it's only drabanan. Okay, so now let's pause for a second and think. What does that mean? What the way Rikvega brings the side of things that's the deraisa, he says, well, it seems obvious. If tam ki'ikar is deraisa, means as long as you could taste the isser, then it's not batal. So shishim is just a convenient number that we came up with, that most foods are batal b'shishim. If this food is not batal until 200 times or 500 times or 10,000 times, so it's the same thing. Well, what's special about that? If you taste it, you taste it. Taste it means then it's also the raisa. If you don't taste it, then it's not also. How could you think that tam kick is the raisa, but most of the time is the rabbanon? That's the question. Well, how could those general hold that it's only the rabbanon? So I'm going to tell you two ways of answering that question. But as the start is, and sort of the overall way is, a lot of the places the Pri Megadim brings is, the Aruch brings, others bring it. They say is no, when a Milsah Davidah is a tam kolish. It's not a regular tam; it's a tam kolish. Okay, and what does that mean? Well, that didn't really explain enough. They said it's not a real tam. Real tam is the raisa, but tam kolish is not the raisa. Well, why is it Milsah Davidah only a tam kolish? Like, what does that mean? So I'm going to take two ways of answering that question. One is Rosh Shechter, who quotes the Balmor and Milsah, and the Balmor says that there's two different. He's not talking about whether Milsah Davidah is to Rabbanan. Not really what he's talking about, but he says there's two different ways that something could be nice and tam. Sometimes when there's Isser mixed into Heter, one thing mixed into the other, you actually taste the Isser. When you actually taste the Isser, that's tam. That's the example of where we would say tam kick is the raisa. You're tasting the Isser. If I put onions into my food, like batzal and kafla into my food, then I taste it, then that's tam kick is the raisa. But there's another kind of time when the Isser that you put into there, you don't taste the Isser. You just know that the taste of the food got changed because there's Isser mixed into here. It doesn't taste like it used to. You don't detect the Isser itself. You just detect that there's a difference in the taste over here. Good. That's what we say. That's when we say Milsah Davidah is a draban. The Milsah Davidah which just changes the overall taste, but it doesn't. You don't actually taste the Isser itself. That's what these people are calling a tam kolish. It's a weak tam. It's not the actual tam of the food, and that's the case. That's the case when we'll say tam kick. When it's possible to say a tam that a Milsah Davidah is only draban. There's a number of rights to it also. And that's where Shechter explains it, which might mean that there are lots of cases where Milsah Davidah would be a deraisa, according to this way of looking at it. Just that in many other cases, only draban. Okay, now I have another answer.
Also like that from the Shach, right?
The Shach says a Milsah Davidah is a draban. Correct. He does, the Shach says but other Acharim talk like that also. There's Ram Pirshim Mishnayos, it sounds like that. There's Yad Yehuda and Wise. A lot of people who say that that's what it means when they say tam kick, because logically it doesn't make sense. The whole idea that something can be batal b'shishim, that's a drabanadika hashara.
I understand. A normal thing is a batal b'shishim, right?
Yes.
Well, because shishim it takes away any substantial time.
Yes.
Okay, the middle time has the mashu after that.
It's only a mashu. Well, the number 60 is a made up number. It's just made up. That happens to be the sharpest thing. If we have a food that's to 70, to 80, to 1,000, what's the difference? Whichever food, it really should be whatever it should be. Okay, now the other answer.
The shishim is a bitul.
That what?
Shishim is better than a bitul. It's not just a tam cake and that takes away the time. It's the bottom of muta, not shanram, it's bottom of muta.
Yeah.
So there is a dim bitul.
There's something special about that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. Okay. You have to show me afterwards. Okay. Now I have another thought which has a little connection to an Aruch Shulchan. And says like this: the Ramaz when he tells you this din of Avidah lטעמא, he says, and Milsah Avidah lטעמא, even in 1,000 times it won't be batal. On his example, he gives two examples. He says salt and spices. Okay, salt and spices. So I made mixtures of salt that was batal in 1,000 and pepper, black pepper that was batal in 1,000. Okay, so I didn't bring the salt with me today. I brought the black pepper. So it happens to be that in the salt, when it's in 1,000, you don't taste it. A scientist will tell you that you only taste it if it's 250 to 1. More than 250 to 1, you don't taste it. The most I got people who tasted it was exactly
taste.
What?
Salt brings out taste. Salt is not enough taste, but
and therefore what?
So you don't taste the salt.
So I'll say what you're saying is, I was heading in that direction anyhow, which is it sounded the most I got from people who tasted this well. They says it just has an off taste, and what I got, that was exactly what the Balmor said, which is it changes the taste of the food even if you don't taste the saltiness. Okay, or what you said is it just brings out the taste of the other food. Again, you don't taste the saltiness. It just gave an overall taste. In 1,000, you weren't tasting. In 250, I made a different mixture that was 250 times, and then you tasted salty. It tasted salty. So that was just a question of, the Ramah says that it's even in 1,000, higher in 1,000. Again, if it's in 1,000, then it's exactly the Balamora, and we don't understand the Shach saying that's the Draban. I'll put that on the side for a second. But then I made the mixture of 1,000 to 1 in pepper. That's this mixture over here. It's 1,000 to 1 in pepper.
What's the rest? Just
water.
Water and black pepper?
Water and black pepper. And 1,000 times as much water as black pepper.
So dark?
From the black pepper.
Okay.
That's the black pepper. Okay? So I made it. And so I took a drink of it. I took a taste of it. And you could taste it. Yes, you could taste the black pepper in 1,000. Okay, in the salt I didn't taste it. In the black pepper you could taste it. But what I noticed is like this. The feature that sticks out the most about black pepper is how pungent and hot it is. That's what one of the things. Black pepper has a certain taste to it, but it's being sharp and strong tasting is a big feature to what black pepper is. Okay, and that you don't taste in this. Okay, and when I thought about it, I realized that it's automatic when you mevatel something in 1,000. Okay, it could be you're going to taste it. Like in the black pepper, you could still taste it. And you could try it here if you want. You still taste it, but you're missing the whole charifas of the black pepper. The pepper it doesn't taste like pepper. It tastes pepper. You taste it. Yeah, this is a pepper taste, but you're not tasting the strength of it. And maybe that's what it means when these achronim say that it's a tam kolish. It means it's automatic that when you take an Avidah lטעמא and you mevatel it 1,000 times, you're going to not have the strength of the Avidah lטעמא because you diluted it 1,000 times. So, which would mean it could be that we say, those who say that a Milsah Avidah lטעמא is a Drabanan, is talking about taka when you did it like this in 1,000 times. What happens if you had done the black pepper in 100 times? I'm sure that you tasted perfectly strong like anything else, as much as you taste Bitul in 60 times. So it could be maybe not even such a difference between them. If at 100 times, everybody would say that it's a deraisa. And at 1,000 times, that's when we could think that maybe it's a derabanan, because again, you taste pepper, you know that's black pepper. You don't think it's something else, but it's still missing from the strength of it, and maybe that's what it means to tam kolish. Okay, now let's get back to where we were. So the Shach says, and many agree with that Milsah Avidah lטעמא is only not bottom derabanan. So you might think then that if a Milsah Avidah lטעמא is only not bottom derabanan, so then maybe by isurun derabanan, we shouldn't worry about a Milsah Avidah lטעמא. But the Shach says it's not true. No, even so, Chazal made the Isser anyhow, and they said a Milsah Avidah lטעמא. It's only not bottom derabanan, and even if it's an Isser derabanan, it's also the same rule is true. For example, what happens if you had hot peppers that were svichen? Okay, so svichen are awesome derabanan. They grew during Shemitah. A vegetable grew during Shemitah, it's awesome derabanan, and black peppers are could be a Milsah Avidah lטעמא. So if you made salsa with those with hot peppers that were svichen, then you would say they're not bottle shishim. Milsah Avidah lטעמא is not bottle no matter what, even though it's an Issa Drabanan. Another variation of that is what about foods that are concentrates? Okay, what I mean we take condensed milk or grape juice concentrate. So there, it's true that those foods have a much stronger tam than the natural, let's say, the milk or the grape juice had by itself. But l'chayr, it seemed to me that in those cases, really what we really need to do is, so we can't say batal b'shishim. It doesn't sort of make sense to make batal b'shishim when this is concentrated. It's they just boiled out all the water and left the ikar, all the flavor of it is in the smaller amount. But we could recreate it and figure out how much it is. So, for example, if we boiled out 4/5 of the water, which you could tell by the instructions to recreate it, you boil out 4/5 of the water, then we need is 5 times as much in order to make the bitul b'shishim. Let's first imagine that this 1 cup of milk that fell into of this condensed milk that fell into here is really not 1 cup of milk fell into here. It's really 5 cups of milk fell into here, and so 5 cups needs 5 times 60 is 300 cups in order to be mevatel. Okay, then we should just recreate, make the cheshbon ourselves and say, okay, it's as if there's a bigger amount, and then make the bitul b'shishim, so not bitul b'shishim, but effectively make bitul b'shishim, but it'll just be, let's say, 300 times, or whatever it is. Okay, so now the most common application that we have of Milsah Avidah lטעמא, when we think about Milsah Avidah lטעמא, is when we talk about flavors. Okay, so flavors, whether a flavor like in this tangerine flavored seltzer over here, when we have a flavor, so there's two reasons to think. Flavors could have non-kosher ingredients, and two reasons to think why it might be batul. One was zev zagarm we spoke about a long time ago. Maybe it's zev zagarm. That's not for today to talk about. Today we're going to talk about the other angle of it. Is that should we treat it as an avidah lטעמא based on another din, which an aspect of Milsah lטעמא, which is Melach habaluah, and that is like this. Salt is considered Milsah lטעמא. I just told you the Rama says it's a Milsah lטעמא, but salt is kosher. Blood is not avidah lטעמא, and blood is not kosher. So the shayla is like this: a person did malicha to a piece of meat, so he put salt onto the meat, and the salt draws out some of the blood out of the meat. So now the melach is balua midam. This melach has absorbed blood into it, and now that salt got mixed into some kosher food. Okay, so whatever happened, it got mixed into the food. So it got mixed in an amount that would be batul b'shishim. So some Rishonim say the salt is treif because it has this blood in it. It's treif. It's avidah lטעמא, so it can't be batul b'shishim in the food. Okay, but the mechaber doesn't pass like that. The mechaber later on, and I think it's in Kuf Hey, in some Kuf Hey, paskins that no, we say since the melach is balua midam, the melach, the salt aspect of it would be batul b'shishim. The blood, the salt of it can't be batul, but the salt is kosher. The blood is batul b'shishim because it's not avidah lטעמא, and therefore the food that it fell into is mutter. Okay, so Rama over there says that he uses a certain phrase to say, he says an isser to not be batul because of avidah lטעמא has to be asur machmas atzmai. It has to be inherently asur. And Rama by Arden also, when he's talking about Milsah avidah lטעמא, he says a Milsah avidah lטעמא is not batul when it's asur machmas atzmai. The same idea, which is a melach habaluah midam, is not going to be a problem of avidah lטעמא. Okay, now that means that makes it the whole din of Milsah avidah lטעמא is very, very limited. The case I gave you beforehand of a hot pepper that was from Svichin, that's an example. It's inherently asur. It's Svichin. It's inherently asur, and it's and now it's an avidah lטעמא. But it's pretty hard to come up with other cases. They're not so easy to find the thing that's asur machmas atzmai. It's inherently asur, but it's avidah lטעמא. So the Shach says, I have an example. He says, what happens if it's from avodah zarah or it was orla? Okay, so neither of those is a very common for us. Okay, so like for orla, actually, I then had to scratch my head. Well, what avidah lטעמא would it be that's orla? Orla is for fruits. Okay, what kind of, it has to be fruit. So most of the things avidah lטעמא we think of are herbs and spices that you you plant every year. So fruits, I can't, but maybe like there's things like cinnamon and cloves and nutmeg, they come from trees, and citrus oils, they come from like lemon oil, comes like that. Okay, so anyway, we could come up with cases, but these are not terribly common that these should be a ways to make isser. So we think, well, what about the flavors that we use like in a modern flavor that people make? So when we think about it, we realize that flavors, that the avidah lטעמא portion of a flavor is rare that should be inherently asur. Again, in order to be not batul, we'll have to say that have been inherently asur. For Pesach, I'll tell you in a minute why. For Pesach, it's a little bit more of an issue, but for year round, it's really hard to imagine it being asur machmas atzmai. Let me just explain a little bit. When you put a flavor into a food, when they put tangerine flavor into my seltzer, they put in the amount that was put in would be batul b'shishim. It's in small amounts. Maybe it's a 0.5% or even less than that, a very small amount. But the question is, maybe it's not batul because it's avidah lטעמא. So if we say it's not asur machmas atzmai, then the avidah lטעמא is not a concern. If the avidah lטעמא is not a concern, then it's just batul b'shishim like it's supposed to be. Okay, so let's think about the different ways things you make a flavor. So for starters, all the parts that are not avidah lטעמא in a flavor, like the diluents and the colors and emulsifiers, all that kind of stuff is not relevant to us. Okay, all those things, those components of the overall flavor are not relevant to us. Those are not questions of avidah lטעמא. So we only have to think about the part that give flavor. So the basic building blocks of a flavor are alcohols and fatty acids. Okay, and they take those and they convert them into things like ketones and aldehydes and esters, all kinds of chemical structures that they make out of these things. So alcohol, let's think about them. Alcohol could be treif if it came from grape or wine. But it's not a terribly common one way to make these things. Wine and grape juice are used for wine and grape juice. To use them, to turn them just into alcohol, to be used even further, to go take it into a flavor, not such a common thing. I can't say it's impossible, but it's not such a terribly common thing. You can make alcohol out of whey also, but if you remember when we spoke about Kitnios, whey is not asam machmasatzvay. It's only asam because it has Blios of Kitnios. It's not asam machmasatzvay. So yes, it could be from grape and wine. Again, it's not a terribly common thing. Fatty acids, they could definitely be very treif, inherently treif. They could be from animal fat, 100% they could be. And certain fatty acids like stearic acid, they come from animal. They commonly come from animal. So that would be a serious concern. But the thing is, those fatty acids are we call long chain fatty acids. They have many carbons in their chains, and those are not particularly flavorful. And the ones that are used for flavors, the ones that are more fragrant, are the shorter chains. Now, the shorter chains are almost always come from vegetable sources. Now, they may be made on kalim. There are issues, Kashrus-wise, there are issues to make sure that they're kosher. But as far as would they be inherently treif, would they be asam machmas atzmai? They would not be. They came from a vegetable, so it wouldn't be asam machmas atzmai. So therefore, as from the Avidah lטעמא perspective, we wouldn't have a problem with them being batal. Now, there is one. This oleic acid, which often comes from animal, can be split in something called non-anoic acid, which is only 9 carbons. It's a shorter chain, but that's not, I don't believe, used much in flavors. Okay, another thing you make flavors and flavorful components by things made by fermentation. Fermentations, by and large, is you take a big vat of sugar, of glucose, and you put something into it. It converts the sugar into something magical that tastes different or has some kind of function. So again, then glucose, except if it came from grape, which is not so usual, that would be inherently kosher. There might be minor ingredients that's to do with the zev zagurim parts of it. They're not so relevant, the nutrients, but it is a Pesach concern, and that's because you can make glucose from any starch that you want to. So in the United States, we would make it from corn, but in Europe, they would make that. It was often made from wheat. Well, if it's made from wheat, then that flavor component would be chametzik. So in Europe, a flavor for Pesach. Because?
No matter what.
No, it's only b'mashu on Pesach. On Pesach. So if I pick up a drink and I want to drink the seltzer, but it would be a concern for them. We could say it's the flavor part of it might be made by fermentation. Parts of Avidah lטעמא are made by fermentation, and it's made from chametz, in which case it wouldn't be batal. Okay, for us that's not such a concern. I'll tell you if I have a chance. I'm going to tell you about whether Kitnios has Avidah lטעמא at the end. But for now, for them, for Europeans, it's more of a concern. For the rest of us, for the rest of the world, it's not such a concern. Okay, now there also there are things that are made from flat out isser. There's the infamous ones. Okay, that if you go to someone speaking about this publicly, they're going to tell you civet and castoreum. Civet is made from a cat, from a certain pouch on a cat, and castoreum is made from a gland in the beaver, and they're of course inherently treif, and they're Avidah lטעמא. Okay, they give tam. Okay, so but if you not only are they rare, they're very not so common, but if you dig into them, what flavor do these give? So the flavor that civet gives is described as being skunky and fecal. Okay, and the flavor of castoreum gives is described as being animally. Okay, so and that's why they're not so much used in food. They're used for perfume. Okay, they're not really used so much in food uses. Plus, since the taste the part that they give is actually negative. Okay, a skunky taste is usually not considered positive in an overall flavor. So I'm saying they in themselves. So that qualifies them then as zev zagurim that we spoke about a different time. That helps qualify them for zev zagurim. Even the other parts want what? Right, but the overall taste might be good, but in what they do is the zev zagurim. The pogum spills into that. Yes. Okay. Another thing, it's possible to make flavorful components out of wine fusel oil, which is a byproduct of making when you distill wine, and that's true. You can make from things also. It's not terribly common again to make those out of wine and grape juice, rather from other stuff. You can make from all kinds of grain alcohols. You get the same stuff, and they tend to save these for high-end products like brandy, not for regular stuff. So I'm not saying that it's not possible, but the chances of getting something that is and nois and tam is not very likely. Now there are other things. I'm not saying that there aren't other things. I'm going to give you two quick examples that are not an issue. One is furfurol, which is a Pesach question. It comes from oats, but furfurol comes from the chaff of the oats, the part that's not chametz thick. It has blios of chametz, so you're not allowed to eat it on Pesach. But as far as the time, it's not such an issue. And extracts could be extracted with alcohol. So there again, the alcohol is not Avidah la't'amah. The alcohol is there. The Avidah la't'amah part is the herb that you took it out of. So again, it wouldn't be a problem. So anyhow, so all these things that I'm saying to you is that the since there's this rule of Melach habaluah midam, for something to be Avidah la't'amah and to make something treif because it's Avidah la't'amah, it has to be inherently usher. We can come up with specific cases where that's going to happen, but in a flavor, it's hard. It's not so common. It's really unusual that should happen. We should have a flavorful component that's inherently treif, and not just because of a blia. That's inherently treif is not so common, and which means is that that would be a reason why it should be batul. Now, all that I said is all for the evidence, where you have the food in front of you. Of course, when we give hashgacha, we don't work like that. Hashgacha, we make sure even the components are kosher, even that the kelim that we made are kosher, even though we know it's going to be batul, etc., etc. But that's for hashgacha. And I mentioned also for Pesach, there's more of chashash, especially for Europeans. So now, just to finish off on Pesach, about Kitnios, I mentioned that these fermentations are made with glucose. Glucose in America would be made from corn, and other places, a lot of other places would be made from Kitnios also. So choyle is allowed to eat Kitnios, and therefore someone who's sick and has a flavor that's made from Kitnios, of course they could eat it. But there's another thing, and that's like this. Usually we say Kitnios is batal b'roiv. Now, if Kitnios is batal b'roiv, Kitnios batal b'roiv means is we don't care about tam ki'ikar. That's what it means. There's no tam ki'ikar, or else it would be need batal b'shishim. It just has to be batal b'roiv. So you would think that if so, Milsah Avidah time wouldn't apply either. Milsah Avidah time is based on tam ki'ikar. But there's a Chok Yaakov who says no, that an Avidah time of Kitnios is not batal. Okay, that's what Chok Yaakov says. Even though, and we spoke about this when we learned about Pas Yisrael. We spoke about it back then. Rav Shachta said you shouldn't be machmer for that sheet altogether. That's put that on the side. But the truth is, when we spoke about them, we found out that even the Chok Yaakov who's machmer, he's machmer for a specific reason, not for today. He's machmer for a specific reason, and that reason means that if there are many components in the flavor, even if it doesn't qualify as zev zagarim, the Kitnios would be batal. We would not be worried about it being a Avidah la't'amah. So for us, that makes it not such a serious issue as well.